Citing a health threat to children and the elderly, U.S. bishops side with the president on the climate change issue. Freeing 5 Guantanamo prisoners to secure the release of a U.S. soldier, critics say it sets a troubling precedent. Pope Francis honors Mary as her month of May closes, then opens June with his Regina Coeli address. And solar flight. This plane is completely powered by the rays of the sun. Those stories and more tonight on EWTN News Nightly for Monday, June 2nd, 2014. Good evening from Washington. Thanks for joining us. I'm Brian Patrick. As we look at news now, supporters and critics are weighing in tonight on a plan to address global warming by cutting carbon dioxide emissions from power plants. Our Wyatt Goolsby reports tonight from the Environmental Protection Agency here in Washington. Wyatt?
Brian, the plan laid out by the EPA is more than 600 pages long. It creates rules for cutting a third of the nation's carbon emissions in the next 15 years. Both the president and the EPA say that's important for keeping down greenhouse gases, which are blamed for global warming. But in the meantime, critics say that all this will do is shut down power plants and drive up the cost of electricity.
Shaped by public input, by present trends, by proven technologies, as well as a healthy dose of common sense, our plan aims to cut energy waste and leverage cleaner energy sources.
Today, EPA Administrator Gina McCarthy named 2 goals for the new plan. First, setting yearly standards for states to cut carbon pollution based on hours of electricity generated. Second, letting states decide how they will do it. But not everyone agrees with the plan. Economist Nicholas Loris with the Heritage Foundation says promoting the environment is great, but warns this plan will have negative consequences.
This is a major energy tax, again, because of our energy needs are met by carbon-emitting fossil fuels. This is going to regulate our energy use. It's going to drive up energy costs. It's really not going to make a dent on global emissions and therefore not have any meaningful impact on climate change.
Exactly how states will meet their targets will likely be up to the next president. Loris argues that reducing current regulations on power plants is a better alternative.
Things that are simple that we don't necessarily associate with environmental regulations, but that will allow companies to make efficiency upgrades with new technologies, new investments will improve efficiencies, and it will drive down emissions in the process.
Despite backlash, the administration and the EPA say they are moving forward.
The facts are very clear. For over 4 decades, EPA has cut air pollution by 70%, and the economy has now more than tripled. Climate action doesn't actually dull America's competitive edge. It sharpens it.
President Obama does not need a vote in Congress in order to approve his plans, but some lawmakers in both the House and the Senate are working on legislation right now to block the plan. Brian?
All right, Wyatt Goolsby at the EPA. Dan Misleh, Executive Director of the Catholic Climate Covenant, is with us, along with Pat Michaels, Director of the Center for the Study of Science at the CATO Institute. First of all, not everyone agrees that the global warming issue is what it's being made out to be here. Where do each of you stand?
Well, global warming is real. People have something to do with it. The second warming of the 20th century, which began in 1976 and ended around 1998, is probably related to human activity in some part, maybe half or something like that. But the problem is that it's not warming at the rate that it was forecast to warm. And so there are a lot of items appearing in the scientific literature since 2011 calling for less net warming than we had predicted. And if that's the case, the problem becomes less emergent.
All right, Dan, what do you think?
Well, the Pope, or now St. John Paul II, 24 years ago wrote about climate change. The Catholic bishops wrote a statement on climate change 13 years ago saying that we need to do something about it and that it's real. So our organization, the Catholic Climate Covenant, is helping to implement that statement across the Catholic community. We're not questioning the science. The science seems to be real, that climate change is happening. The vast majority of scientists say that it is so. So we're moving on the basis of now what can we do about it.
So the Catholic bishops issued a statement on Friday about this. They appear to be siding with the president on this.
Yeah, well, at least they're saying we need to do something to start driving down carbon emissions, and this is one step that Administrator McCarthy put out today. Archbishop Wensky of Miami issued that statement last Friday.
So how much do you think this is going to do, Pat, if this is implemented the way the administration is putting it out there?
Let's say they're 100% successful. You can actually do the calculation on EPA's own model, which is called the Model for the Assessment of Greenhouse Gas-Related Climate Change, which, by the way, is acronymed MAGIC. And if you run MAGIC with the emissions changes that were Administrator McCarthy said would happen, you would save 0.02 of a degree Celsius of global warming by the year 2100. That's an amount that's far too small to measure. You'll never see it. So the fact of the matter is, even if the United States cut its emissions to 0 today and kept them there until the year 2100, the MAGIC model tells us the amount of warming that would be prevented is 0.2 of a degree. This is not just a U.S. issue.
Do you agree or disagree?
Well, I mean, I think we have to do whatever we can as a church, as individuals, as families, businesses, governments. Everybody has to pitch in because it is a problem. And we don't know, the scientists don't know what the consequences of all this is going to be. But what the Catholic bishops have said is there are 3 principles that we need to abide by: prudence, poverty, and the common good. We know enough to know we need to act. That's the prudence part. We know that low-income people, those who have contributed the least to the problem, are going to suffer the worst consequences, and Catholic Relief Services around the world is already seeing that. And then the common good. There's nothing more common than the atmosphere that surrounds the globe. The auto emissions that I put into the atmosphere driving over here today did not stay in Washington, D.C. They're going to be going around the globe, creating even more global warming. So we all need to do our part to try to curtail emissions.
So it's going to cost, though, to take these measures. I'm sure it's going to cost each of us.
Yes. We don't know. Nobody really knows the cost because human beings are pretty adaptable. I will say that in the acid rain legislation, remember that from about 20 years ago, people predicted enormous, horrible cost, and it turned out not to be that big a deal. But carbon dioxide might be different than sulfur dioxides and nitrogen oxides. They're kind of the respiration of our civilization, and it's going to be really expensive. If you're really serious, it's really expensive.
Well, we are serious about breathing, that's for sure. All right. Pat and Dan, thank you so much for being with us tonight.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Some of the other stories our EWTN News Nightly team is covering in today's world. Spain's king surprised his country today, announcing that he will abdicate the throne in favor of his son.
Quiero lo mejor para España, a la que he dedicado mi vida.
King Juan Carlos addressed the nation, saying he wants what's best for Spain, and he says his son Felipe, heir to the throne, embodies stability. The king came to power in 1975, just days after the death of longtime dictator Francisco Franco. He recently said he wanted to be remembered as the king who has united all Spaniards. Israel is rejecting talks with Palestinians after their president formed a new joint government today. Palestinian President Mahmoud Abbas swore in the new government, which is backed by the Islamic militant group Hamas. Israel considers Hamas a terrorist group. The Obama administration says it intends to work with the new Palestinian government, despite the Israeli concerns. This development comes just days before Abbas and Israeli President Shimon Peres are to pray together with Pope Francis at the Vatican on Sunday. Heavy fighting continues in Ukraine today. Hundreds of pro-Russian insurgents attacked a border guard base in eastern Ukraine. Some fired rocket-propelled grenades from the roof of a nearby building. At least 5 rebels were killed when the guards returned fire. Pro-Russian insurgents have been waging increasingly aggressive attacks on government-held checkpoints. In those attacks, they have seized weapons and ammunition from the Ukrainian forces. A heavy dust storm roared into Iran's capital today, killing at least 4 people and injuring 30 others. The storm struck Tehran with winds of up to 68 miles an hour. It caused power outages, broke trees, and apparently caused a chain reaction crash on the highway. Authorities asked children and the elderly to stay indoors. A Colorado baker must make wedding cakes for same-sex couples despite his religious objections. This unanimous ruling came down on Friday from Colorado's Civil Rights Commission. That 7-member commission found Jack Phillips violated civil rights law when he refused to make a wedding cake for a same-sex wedding in 2012. Phillips is a devout Christian and says this decision violates his First Amendment rights to free speech and free exercise of religion. The Seattle City Council is expected to approve an ordinance to phase in a $15 an hour minimum wage, the highest in the nation. The ordinance passed in committee last week would take effect next April and allow a sub-minimum wage for teenagers. It was drafted by an advisory group of labor, business, and nonprofit representatives convened by Mayor Ed Murray. It would phase in wage increases over 3 to 7 years, depending on the size of the business and employee benefits. Well, an American soldier is free after nearly 5 years of Taliban captivity. Army Sergeant Bo Bergdahl was part of a U.S. and Taliban prisoner swap. Our Jason Calvi joins us tonight with that story. Jason.
Well, Brian, residents of the Idaho town where he comes from are planning a homecoming celebration. But for now, the sergeant's in stable condition in a German hospital. The hospital isn't sharing many details. They do say they're treating the soldier's nutritional needs.
My name is Bo Bergdahl.
This video from 2009 shows the jailed U.S. soldier.
I'm scared I won't be able to go home.
Nearly 5 years as a prisoner are finally over for Sergeant Bo Bergdahl. The Taliban handed him over to U.S. Special Forces on Saturday. His parents spoke at the White House this weekend.
I'd like to say to Bo right now, who's having trouble speaking English, Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim, Zayabayem. I'm your father, Bo.
The 28-year-old sergeant is now being treated at this hospital in Germany. U.S. Secretary of Defense Chuck Hagel said U.S. intelligence suggested that Bergdahl's safety and health were at risk.
Sergeant Bergdahl has missed birthdays and holidays and the simple moments with family and friends, which all of us take for granted. But while Bo was gone, he was never forgotten.
Some reports claim the sergeant walked away from his unit in 2009 when he was captured. Defense Secretary Hagel wouldn't comment on those allegations, but said such matters would be dealt with later. As part of the swap, 5 Taliban fighters were freed from the U.S. prison in Guantanamo Bay. They boarded a U.S. military plane, and they're banned from leaving the country of Qatar for at least a year. But Afghanistan wasn't involved in the deal, and today the Afghan Foreign Ministry criticized the trade.
The government of the Islamic Republic of Afghanistan is expressing its strong concern about this, and at the same time demanding full and unconditional freedom for its citizens.
Among those freed by the U.S., a Taliban deputy intelligence minister, an interior minister, and a figure human rights monitors linked to mass killings. Now, we just learned from the AP that they're reporting that a 2010 Pentagon investigation found that the sergeant did indeed walk away from his unit. The debate now continues. Will those freed Taliban fighters find their way to fighting the U.S. again? And could the prisoner swap put other Americans at risk of being snatched? Brian?
Let's discuss that with Amber Barno, a military helicopter pilot who served in Iraq and Afghanistan. I'm sure, Amber, that you're relieved, like the family is, that he's free. What do you think this soldier is going through right now?
Well, I am relieved that he's home. No one should have to go through 5 years of captivity with the Taliban. And he's in Germany right now going through the prisoner of war reintegration program that anyone who's held captive from the enemy goes through. So he'll be getting health and physical, mental health screening for some time before he's released back to San Antonio, Texas, where I think is the next spot he'll end up.
Do you agree with the way his freedom was secured?
No, I absolutely do not. The U.S. does not have a policy for negotiating with terrorists, and suddenly the Obama administration has decided that that's okay, and therefore putting a target on U.S. soldiers' backs overseas as well as American civilians for some time to come.
So do you think this could backfire, that this would maybe give motivation to people to take captives, hoping that they can arrange such a deal?
It is. It is going to give terrorists, any enemy combatants, incentive to grab any sort of American that they can get their hands on, because they know that they will have leverage then to negotiate with the American government, whether that be for money to free these terrorists, like we saw these top-level terrorists, Taliban members in Guantanamo. So it's nothing that we need to be doing at this time, especially where we're at in the war in Afghanistan.
Well, flying helicopters, as you did and other family members of yours did in combat zones, you could have been shot down. You could have been taken prisoner. Mm-hmm. If that were you, if you were the prisoner, how would you want your country to handle that?
Well, there's steps in place that you have training for. If it's a lot different if a helicopter gets shot down as far as the rescue operations go than some of the circumstances that are surrounding this issue. I don't know, but there's criteria based on going in for a rescue operation based on intelligence and what they can find out about the situation. So I can't believe that it went on for 5 years, to tell you the truth.
All right, Amber Barno, we appreciate your insight. Certainly something that adds to this story for us. Thank you.
Thank you.
Well, Pope Francis makes another plea for peace this Sunday at the Vatican. He highlighted Ukraine and Central African Republic at the end of this Sunday's Regina Coeli public prayer at St. Peter's Square.
Rinnovo il mio accorato appello a tutte le parti implicate perché siano superate le incomprensioni e si ricerchi con pazienza il dialogo e la pacificazione.
Thousands gathered outside St. Peter's Basilica to hear the Pope speak, some waving Ukrainian flags. The Holy Father said the conflicts weighed heavily on him, and he prayed for guidance. And check this out. Today, the Solar Impulse 2 completed its first flight. This is a Swiss-made, solar-powered aircraft. Its makers are preparing for what they hope will be the first successful round-the-world solar flight. The plane draws energy from the sun through its solar cells covering its massive wings. The Solar Impulse 2 spent 2 hours and 17 minutes in the air today above western Switzerland. Coming up, kids love Papa Francesco. The Holy Father welcomes the young with open arms. And Pope Francis joins thousands of charismatic Catholics to open the Renewal of the Spirit gathering in Rome. Today's tweet from Pope Francis in the form of a prayer. At times we can be self-absorbed. Lord, help us to open our hearts to others and to serve those who are most vulnerable. Thanks for being with us on EWTN News Nightly. I'm Brian Patrick on this Monday evening, and as Pope Francis continues to make headlines around the world, a younger generation remains captivated by the Holy Father. One group of Italian children spent some quality time with Pope Francis over the weekend, and our Mark Irons has their story.
In this cell phone video, Pope Francis tells the children how happy he is to see them. The feeling is mutual. 400 Italian children, many taking a train from Naples and others coming from just outside of Rome, were overjoyed to spend time with the Pope on Saturday. The event was hosted by the Pontifical Council for Culture's Court of the Gentiles in collaboration with Trenitalia, the Italian train company which sponsored the ride to Rome. Smiles, selfies, and singing. A welcome weekend getaway for these school children who come from tough family situations and disadvantaged homes. The Court of the Gentiles program aims to open dialogue between believers and non-believers. The message the Pope gave these children was simple: love, something they all agreed would make the world a better place. As Francis gave the children his full attention, they later presented him with a song, O Sole Mio, a traditional Italian ballad, a thumbs up from a happy Pope, and children who left overjoyed having met him. Mark Irons, EWTN News Nightly.
Beautiful story. Thank you, Mark. Hundreds of priests, religious, and lay people paid tribute to Our Lady this weekend, closing out her month of May, of course, the month dedicated to our Blessed Mother. Led by Cardinal Angelo Camastri, the pilgrims prayed the rosary and sang hymns to Mary. They held candles and processed through the Vatican gardens as evening fell. The crowd included children and young people, and Pope Francis joined them at the end. He concluded the evening with a prayer to Our Lady, star of the new evangelization. And the Pope led a pep rally to boost faith at Rome's soccer stadium on Sunday. More than 50,000 people who follow the charismatic movement packed the stadium, many raising their hands in prayer. Francis told the faithful that the devil wants to destroy the family. He also said, charismatic renewal is a great force for the church. The charismatic movement stresses the Holy Spirit and seeks to inject renewed fervor in the faith. Well, the Vatican and other world leaders are calling for the release of a Sudanese woman sentenced to death for her Christian beliefs. Miriam Ibrahim is still in prison with her 20-month-old son and now her daughter, who was born just a few days ago. Today, the Vatican called for prayers for the unconditional release of Miriam on social media. British Prime Minister David Cameron and former Prime Minister Tony Blair also called for her release. They say her sentence is a brutal and sickening distortion of faith. Up next, she's best known as Alice, the lovable housekeeper for the Brady Bunch, remembering actress Ann Davis. And would you want to share the road with a driverless car? It could be the next big thing. Thanks for joining us on this Monday evening. I'm Brian Patrick, and the woman who played Alice Nelson, the beloved housekeeper on the Brady Bunch, has died.
Alice, isn't that a lovely picture? Lovely. A lot nicer than the one I just got.
What picture is that, Alice?
The x-ray from my dentist.
Ann Davis died in a San Antonio hospital yesterday after suffering a fall Saturday. She won 2 Emmys for her other television roles, appeared on Broadway, and acted in some movies. One of Davis's good friends, a retired Episcopal bishop, said she lived a quiet, religious life. Ann Davis was 88. So you think some drivers out there are scary? How about a car with no driver at all? They've become a common sight on the streets near Google headquarters, self-driving cars.
We're really excited about how the technology is advancing. We think it has a real opportunity to improve safety and the ability for people to get around.
Google just unveiled a new type of autonomous vehicle that doesn't have a steering wheel, brake pedal, or accelerator. But Google isn't just developing the technology. It's also taking a lead role in writing the rules of the road for driverless cars. 2 years ago, Google worked with State Senator Alex Padilla to pass legislation that legalized autonomous cars in California.
We can save lives, we can create jobs, and ease congestion and reduce emissions in the process. That's a dream bill.
That bill was signed by Governor Jerry Brown after the tech giant pushed to get the nation's first driverless car law approved in Nevada. It's unusual and potentially risky for companies to ask for regulation like Google did. But experts say it creates legal certainty and helps the company achieve a key objective.
Advancing, promoting, and shaping the conversation at a very early stage about what these vehicles are and what role they should play in society.
But some say Google has had too much influence on the laws and regulations.
They had their lobbyists out in full force in Sacramento on the bill and trying to get it through, and they're not looking out for your interest and my interest, they're looking out for Google's interests.
While privacy advocates are worried about the security of your driving data, some say these cars have the potential to transform our roads and cities.
Cars could be shared, they could drive to, they could park themselves, they could charge themselves if they were electric.
That future is being imagined as California regulators write the rules that will determine when driverless cars are ready to drive the public. Yeah, but who do you yell at when one of those cars cuts you off on the interstate? I don't know. Well, like so many of us, Fabien Cousteau was entranced by his famous grandfather's films about marine life and underwater exploration. Now the grandson of Jacques Cousteau is embarking on a 31-day underwater expedition in the Florida Keys. He plans to spend about a month living underwater with a 5-person crew in a laboratory about the size of a school bus. It's 60 feet below the ocean's surface near the Aquarius Reef, a few miles off Key Largo. They're calling the adventure Mission 31.
It reminded me that I've always wanted to live underwater, and in a sense, Mission 31 is based on the first ever exploits of my grandfathers with Conshelf 2 of living underwater for a full month.
The younger Cousteau can do something his grandfather could not, broadcast live online and communicate directly with students through social media and video chats. And he doesn't have that French accent, though. But that's very exciting. That's all for tonight. Remember, we're now on 5 nights a week. Until tomorrow, you can like us on Facebook, follow us on Twitter. You can catch tonight's news again on EWTN's YouTube page. For all of us here at EWTN News Nightly, I'm Brian Patrick. Thank you for watching tonight. Good night and God bless you.